And to Sports by Brooks here in Los Angeles, live every weekday, noon Eastern time. Sports by Brooks on Fancred. Our producer today, of course, as always, is Cam Smith. Coming up later, we're going to welcome in for the first time, noted football historian, in case you didn't know, and longtime anchor of the Big Ten Network, pretty much the face of the Big Ten Network, Dave Revson, will join us, and we'll talk Big Ten football. We'll talk about signing day. We'll talk about Jim Harbaugh, I'm sure, and lots of other stuff as it pertains to college football. Of course, Dave, I remember Dave, and you probably do too, with ESPN. He was also a stalwart there. So we'll talk Big Ten, college football, and we'll touch on his great book that he actually wrote himself. Phenomenal book that I think if you're looking for a Christmas gift, and it came out last year, this is just me bringing it up. If you have a football fan in your family or somebody you know, his book is the ultimate Christmas gift because it's an entertaining book about college football history, and it's legit. So we'll talk about that later. Also, we're going to be talking about the disaster at Heritage Hall, USC. When I say USC had a bad recruiting class, at least what they have so far coming out of signing day yesterday. Yeah, I mean, you can't exaggerate how bad it is. USC, as it stands right now, has signed 11 guys, right? Their recruiting class in the 24/7 composite is ranked below Bowling Green. I tweeted that out, and Matt Leinart comes out on his Twitter yesterday and calls Oregon the new USC of recruiting. Matt Leinart. And I mean, you could imagine, if you know anything about college football fans, and USC fans really are no different than most college football factory school fans. Normally, if you do that and you're a high-profile alum, doesn't matter if you're a famous guy that the fans love, and you're Matt Leinart and you tweet out, hey, Oregon is the new USC, our school, of recruiting. They've passed us. They're blowing our doors off, right? Normally, if that happens, that guy would get a lot of blowback. But if you look at the replies, there's like 1,000 of them on Leinart's Twitter account today. They all agree with him. They all agree with him. And so we're going to get into that in a second because I had a lot of thoughts about USC and the situation. And we'll have some actual concrete analysis from Barton Simmons, friend of the show, Ryan Abraham, friend of the show. The two top guys on the national and USC front will have some instant analysis from them as well on that USC situation. You know, whoever's the top team in football recruiting, who cares? I'm not really into that. Clemson did it again, or Alabama, whatever it is. But this is notable, what's happening to USC, and the fact that Helton is still gainfully employed, and I'll explain to you why later. But the first thing I want to touch on is this firing of Tom Coughlin. Now, normally, it's not that big of a deal unless you're in Jacksonville or your job is to cover the NFL, I guess, as a breaking news reporter like friend of the show Ian Rappaport or Adam Schefter or Jason La Canfora, those kinds of guys. Usually it's not that big a deal. I mean, it's a big deal because he's running the football operation in Jacksonville, but it isn't because it's in Jacksonville, right? But this actually is a big deal. This is really extraordinary what's happened because the players fired Tom Coughlin. You may think Shad Khan fired him. Khan came out with a weird statement today without any explanation, but of course he doesn't have to explain what happened. We're going to show you in a second and explain this to you. But Tom Coughlin's been fired. He was all set up to retire. at the end of the season, and Shad Khan knew he was. And so I'm reading reports today, one report particularly earlier today, where they're talking about, can you believe that Shad Khan did Coughlin like that, right? And so if you don't know the real reason he was fired, and that's not mentioned in Khan's statement, and that hasn't been mentioned by a lot of media outlets, some, not all, we're going to show you one of them in a second, you'd have no idea what the hell's going on. But let's first run the clip. Adam Schefter covered the story today on ESPN's a short clip where he explains pretty much the reason Coughlin was fired.
The Jaguars fired Tom Coughlin yesterday. Why and what's next?
Well, look, Shad Khan, the owner, knew that he was going to be firing Tom Coughlin after the season. But when the NFLPA came out this week and said that over 25% of all grievances in the NFL over the last 2 years were against Jacksonville, that they felt that the Jaguars were unfair to players and that players should think about where they're going to sign in the future, Shad Khan, the Jaguars owner, decided to make the move last night. And so a move he was going to make after the season was made.
Shall we get a one shot
Tom Coughlin out
of Adam? How about a one shot?
With the team was a promising 10-win season, culminated with a trip to the AFC Championship game.
Boy, that never happens where he goes, right? They never start off good and then fall off.
They've managed just 10 wins over the last 2 seasons combined. And shortly after the news, Jalen Ramsey tweeted his reaction with simply 2 emojis. He, of course, didn't quite see eye to eye.
Wait till you hear this comment from Cam Smith's friend coming up
skipped the team's
on the panel.
OTAs back in
Quick
April.
little comment about Coughlin coming up.
Honestly, this news brought so much joy to my heart because it vindicates so many people. Jalen Ramsey, you were right. Leonard Fournette, you were right. Dante Fowler, you were right. I'll say this, and I think this applies in a household and it applies on a football field. Rules without relationship equals rebellion. Rules without
I love that. I got to steal that.
I like that. Tom Coughlin showed up with a whole bunch of rules, but he had no relationships. And guess what?
Right.
Player after player after player after player started to rebel. Simple as that.
And it's not like Tom Coughlin comes in like he's a Bill Belichick, right? It's not like he's got this unbelievable resume, and all of a sudden he's got all these rules. I love that, though. Rules without relationships equals rebellion. When I write my life coach book, which I should probably consult a head coach on how to do that, since they all do that. Like I remember when Jim Tressel released his life coach book, and then 2 weeks later he was fired for cheating his ass off, which he had always cheated. So now he talked about players, and now think back to Jalen Ramsey and his situation, right? Now, knowing what we know, analyze that, if you will. So we have some more video from Doug Marrone, the coach of the Jaguars. That's the first part of this quick little video. And then we have Dante Fowler. We have Leonard Fournette. So check this out. Here's some reaction from the news.
And games and everything. I'm probably going to reach out, and ask why. I think for me, I'm one of those guys. I kind of overanalyze things, and I try to get both sides and see what's going on, before I, form an opinion on
He's
things.
Talking about the NFLPA's.
That's, when I first heard about
Not the firing.
That's how I felt. I'm sure there's
why he was called out.
I don't think they just throw things out there, and I'd like to be able to talk to the PA if they want to talk to me. They may not, but hopefully I've been a member of it, and it went on strike.
So that's
I've been
his response to the NFLPA calling out Jacksonville.
I have a copy of the first players meeting ever that I keep in my desk.
See, as he's saying that, he knows it's Coughlin.
Here, you're a guy that they took away some things after last year. Is this a problem in Jacksonville?
I don't know, but I know, like, as far as the money part, I think it's kind of extreme sometimes, but to see what I seen today that came out, that's crazy. Individually, I don't know what happens or what caused it, but, I'm glad he got his money back, or he's getting his money back, whatever the case may be. But
he's talking about the fines
that the
Jags had imposed.
of trying to communicate with the players and build a better relationship with the players, number one. So that's all I can speak on with Coach Dodd.
One last one. Do you like it in Jacksonville? You want to be here? You want to be one of the staples, the face of the franchise guys? Because right now you are.
Yeah.
But you've got 1 year left.
Yeah.
On your contract. That's it. I mean,
maybe now.
You still want to be
maybe
here?
now.
Yeah, most definitely. I love it here. The people love me. It's my second home. So I enjoyed every bit of it.
In the offseason, you have players from other leagues. They come and ask me about the fines. Like, is it true y'all getting fined for stuff like this? And they laugh at us because they think that I'm lying. But now that stuff like this is coming out, it's true we got fined for it. So maybe we'll fix it ahead of time. But one thing I can say, we get fined here, we learn from it, we try to avoid it from here on out. So.
Have you had any issues in getting fined since you've been here?
Yeah, I think one, but it was more of just miscommunication. That was like in 2017 when we were all coming together. I've been taught not to really go to things that don't work for me, but what don't work for me might work for somebody else, and they're going to force everybody to do it. And I didn't show up because I did something else. So I paid the fine, tried to appeal. I couldn't take it, but I just was like, all right, even though it doesn't benefit me.
So these are the players talking about the ridiculous fines that Coughlin had levied against them. All right. Right. And this is before Coughlin, we find out, has been fired because of what you guys just watched. Right. I'm going to read what is a short statement. So this is why Coughlin was fired today. I'm going to read the statement to you from the NFLPA that came out yesterday. Now, this is me saying that, but that's Adam Schefter saying that. Ian Rappaport said that this morning on NFL. This is why he got fired, which is really amazing. This is unprecedented in NFL history. So here is the quick statement from the NFLPA on the methods of the Jacksonville Jaguars in how the players have been treated and unfair fines that have been imposed on those players. In a recent decision from a grievance filed by our union, an arbiter affirmed that under the collective bargaining agreement between the players and the owners, teams cannot require rehabilitation or medical appointments at team facilities during the offseason and pre-training camp, period. That's in the sentence. Historically, our union has fought hard to secure broad freedoms for our players. Really? The NFL player union has, the head of the union? I'll start again. All right, we're kind of revising history on that one. Historically, our union has fought hard to secure broad freedoms for players after the season ends. For that reason, the CBA limits what a club may require of players during the offseason. Despite this, the Jacksonville Jaguars recently decided that they would require injured players to get all off-season rehab at the Jags facility. How nice. When players failed to attend these mandatory off-season rehab sessions in Jacksonville, they were disciplined by the club. As an aside, who decides who's injured, right? That's kind of one of the big issues here. Let me continue. This is the NFLPA statement that got Tom Coughlin fired that was released yesterday. And now let me continue it. In response, the NFLPA filed a grievance challenging the club's right to discipline a player in those circumstances, those off-season mandatory rehab sessions. For example, during the 2018 off-season program, the Jags fined a player 25 times. 25 freaking times. We can't get on the phone and have a meeting or figure this out. 25 times? That's me. All right. For example, during the 2018 offseason program, the Jaguars fined a player 25 times. I mean, that's infantile. That's Tom Coughlin for missing mandatory appointments with a club trainer or physician. It's almost over. This is quick. All told, this player was fined over $700,000 for missing off-season appointments. This is just one of the many grievances we had to file to protect our players from the Jaguars' actions. Read Tom Coughlin. That's me. Continuing. The jointly appointed arbiter jointly appointed arbiter rejected the Jaguars' arguments that they had a right to fine a player for not rehabbing at a club facility. That arbiter held that, with limited exceptions, off-season activities are strictly voluntary, and no club can make those activities mandatory. I mean, one more paragraph, but think about that. It's not mandatory, right? And for all we know, the Jags are deciding if you're hurt or not, and if you don't show up, you get fined, right? 25 times for almost $1 million. That's infantile. Tom Coughlin is a big fat baby. If you're doing that with a player 25 times, we can't figure this out as adults. Continuing, one more paragraph to go. Listen to the last sentence, and this is the key. The last sentence of the last paragraph is why Tom Coughlin didn't get to announce his own retirement at the end of the season. The decision puts a stop to the blatant overreach by the Jaguars and emphasizes the voluntary nature of almost all football activities during the offseason. It should be noted that Jaguars players continue to be at odds with Jaguars management over the rights under the CBA far more than players on other clubs. In the last 2 years, more than 25% of the grievances filed by players in the entire league have been filed against the Jaguars. Now, the NFLPA in this last sentence is speaking directly to the players. Last sentence. You, as players, may want to consider this when you have a chance to select your next club. Gonzo. See ya. So that's why I was fired. The end. That wasn't really covered all that much yesterday when it came out. I think anybody who knows anything about the NFL, and one of the reasons why I stopped and emphasized it on this sentence earlier in the statement. Historically, our union has fought hard to secure the broad freedoms for players. What are you talking about? No, you haven't. You're the problem. I mean, ever hear of guaranteed contracts? Take a look at what Major League Baseball has. And they did all that stuff at the beginning. They started this whole thing. If it wasn't for Major League Baseball, we wouldn't have real representation for the players. Baseball created that. Unfortunately, the NFL and the union is in bed with the league for the most part. That's what makes this so extraordinary. And when you think about a major league like baseball, the NBA, NFL, NHL, right? Which union is the weakest? In other words, players union. In other words, which union is in bed with the owners the most? The NFL. And so when this union steps out and does that, and directly in a public statement addresses all of the NFL players out there, you as players may want to consider this when you have a chance to select your next club. Right. Now, mind you, this took $700,000 in fines. This took 25% of the grievances to be lodged by the Jaguars in all of the grievances during the 2018 year. Over 25% were lodged by Jaguar players. Now go back. And this is how the media works. All right? This is how the media works. Think about Jalen Ramsey. Is Jalen Ramsey, a guy who is a malcontent, right? Who is an individual and not a team player, right? Well, back then he was, when he forced his way out of Jacksonville with the fake injuries and all the other stuff. Look at what he's doing, right? What a bad guy. How could you not think? I mean, remember when Jalen Ramsey in the middle, I mean, that was unprecedented. That was extraordinary. What's funny about that at that time is it wasn't really being covered like that at the time either. Maybe because a lot of the media knew about what Coughlin was doing, I suppose. But that wasn't reported as extensively as we get from the union yesterday. But do you remember after one of the Jags games when Jalen Ramsey was supposedly injured, right? He was actually seen in an Instagram photo with Deshaun Watson, hanging out with Deshaun Watson after the Texans game that week, like on a Sunday evening, right? Think about this, though. This is important. We've been talking about the Belichick situation, and I do mean the Belichick situation with the Patriots and the Bengals. Is he going to be suspended? It really sounds like there's no way that's going to happen. That's the way it sounds to me. We'll see. But that's a referendum on league integrity. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing again. We talked about it all week. We've had several people on from Boston, New England. We'll continue to cover it. I think we're going to have somebody on from perhaps Boston tomorrow because we got to continue to cover this. It's not over. But that we're not even talking about the prospect of Belichick. When you look at the level of cheating that has gone on for so long, and the team has been so successful and high profile, and we're still seeding, the fact that, oh yeah, we believe Bill. We know that they weren't involved. The football operations side wasn't involved. On what basis? People that are saying that, on what basis? All right. So to me, right there, we'll see what the NFL does. If they suspend Belichick for a game or the playoffs or whatever, good. That's what should happen. That tells me we have an organization like the company you yourself work for. People get suspended when they cheat for 10 straight years or whatever it is. Or they tacitly sign off on people cheating in their organization. Foster that environment, right? You get suspended. You get fired. You get fined, whatever. Belichick hasn't gotten any of that, except in one case of fine. That's it. And what's that? That's literally nothing. So if we don't get some sort of sanction of Belichick specifically, the league has no integrity. And the league thinks nothing of the media. The league thinks the media is a joke. And part of the basis of me saying that is our conversation with a longtime, well-respected NFL writer, reporter, currently covering the league, Greg Bedard. Greg Bedard was on this show last week, well-respected. And we talked about it with the video. And I said to Greg, what if the video is worst case scenario? Because we didn't know about the video at the time. And what if those 8 minutes turn out to be what has been reported already? Are those 8 minutes on that tape? And we now know, by the way, that's exactly what's on the tape. We've seen it. At least we've seen a minute of it. God knows what else is on there. And his first blush reaction was, because he's a normal human being, well, maybe a suspension. I mean, they've got to do something. They've got to make a statement, the NFL, that goes beyond what they've done in the past. And he even brought up a ban of Belichick, permanent, from the league. I remember, you may remember this. Cam Smith is our producer today here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. You may remember, Cam, when Greg said a ban of Belichick potentially, if it's a worst case scenario on the tape. And I said, what, like a shoeless Joe Jackson, Black Sox, 1919 permanent ban? He's like, yeah, right. He didn't have time to process the question. And had he given it more thought, I'm sure it would have been a little bit more measured, perhaps, maybe not. But this is a guy who's covered the NFL for decades and is going to cover the Raiders for the Las Vegas Review-Journal next year. He's a national guy, a local guy. He's covered the Packers, the Patriots, the highest level of NFL media. And that was just his reaction. And I 100% agree. And I didn't lead him in that way. I 100% agree with him. And so if we don't get that, we don't even get any discussion of that. And see, here's the thing. That's not even coming up in the conversations that you see on ESPN and Fox. It's not even coming up. You know what's coming up? Oh, I think that Belichick didn't know about it, right? Now, we read Jay Glazer's comments in The Athletic. Now, Jay Glazer, of course, did the tape for Fox. Great job. Biggest breaking news of the year. Jay does it again. Interesting, though, his comments, his remarks about it. In fact, I want to pull them up just so I'm accurate, because Jay, for the first time since he put up the video, has further commented, and he does this is a great reason to subscribe to The Athletic. He does a weekly mailbag, which kind of flies under the radar, but has a lot of proprietary stuff. That's some great nuggets that don't make it onto the air at Fox. He's only on like 5 minutes a week. So let me read you the exchange. This is on the athletic.com website, and this is Jay Glazer's mailbag. And the headline is on the Patriots investigation. So he gets a question from William V. This is Jay Glazer. Came out this week, actually, not today, earlier this week. The question to Jay is from a reader. What do you expect will be the result of the Patriots investigation? Glazer's response, quote, on Fox NFL Sunday, I showed exclusive video of what transpired between the Patriots producer videographer when he was confronted by the Bengals and NFL security. It's a pretty wild verbal exchange, but the biggest question here is intent. There will be punishment. The Patriots have admitted to not following proper game day operation rules with regard to filming. But this investigation will revolve around intent and who is connected to the incident. There is 8 minutes of footage of the Bengals bench, then field, and back and forth. The league has to determine if it was done for a show or what an advance scout looks at, or if it was something more. Let me read that last sentence. The league has to determine if this video was done for a show on what an advanced scout looks for, or if it was something more than that, right? Now, what Jay's saying there, I respectfully, it's not that I disagree. I just don't think that it should be treated that way. What that tells me is there's nobody better. Obviously, there's nobody better plugged in on this story or in the NFL at this point. Sure looks like it. Every year this happens. Than Jay Glazer. If Glazer's saying that, to me, that's a tip-off that nothing's happening. There's going to be no suspension. It's going to be the same old thing. It's going to be a slap on the wrist, whatever, draft picks. Have the Patriots built their dynasty on draft picks? Is that what it is? Is that what happened? Absolutely not. They built it from Bill Belichick coaching the team and the front office led by Bill managing the roster, Kraft enabling it financially. None of that will be impugned. Zero. None. In the way that Jay's writing that, I mean, I don't think Jay's necessarily, I don't know, but I doubt that what he's writing did not come from some inside information as to how it's being handled by the league. And to me, if the league is saying, let me read this one more time. If the league, now put yourself in Goodell's shoes and how you're approaching this situation. Are you approaching this with past incidents in mind or not? Are you approaching this based solely on what the intent of the videographer was? Let me read this again. There will be punishment. The Patriots have admitted to not following proper game day operation rules with regard to filming. But this investigation will revolve around intent. revolve around intent with regard to filming. There is 8 minutes of footage of the Bengals bench, then field, and back and forth. The league has to determine if it was done for a show on an advanced scout or if it was something more. Right. He doesn't mention past incidents. Knowing Jay, and I know Jay personally, we watched a Monday Night Football game together right down the street from here where we're broadcasting today here in Los Angeles a few weeks ago. I've worked out of his gym a couple of times. We're not best buddies. My guess is that it's not a coincidence that he has written it up this way. Not a coincidence that he hasn't mentioned in that in this athletic mailbag piece that the past really isn't a huge factor in this decision, right? Pretty much, it sounds like, and again, look, this is pure speculation. Jay's report is what it is, to his credit. It is what it is. And I don't know where the text of his report comes from. But that he's so plugged in and knowing him a little bit, I think exactly what he wrote in that report right there that doesn't factor in the past, right? Doesn't factor in the plausible deniability part of this potential, right? When you think about a corporation or an organization where the CEO, right, fosters an environment or communicates to his employees that you can go do things that you shouldn't be doing, right? Go ahead, but don't tell me, right? That's not part of Jay's report. And to me, that indicates that the NFL is looking at it in such a manner. And that is a big reason why nobody's talking about Bill Belichick. He's not part of it. He's not part of it. It's amazing, isn't it? I remember in the aftermath of this is just typical. And I think it is an apt description. And I don't claim, the reason we have so many people from Boston and New England on when we're covering the Patriots is so we do get people on the ground. But I have my own opinions, and it's educated opinions from a lot of these folks. And I talked to some of these folks off the air too about what's going on with the Patriots. But so I don't know as much as they do. I'm not there. I'm not on the ground. I'm not interacting with non-football people. So I don't know the dynamic of their organization, just so you know. When I say that the way Belichick and the Patriots' success is lionized and portrayed indicates that nothing moves in that building without him knowing about it. That's part of the whole pretense, right? Case in point, nobody knows any names of 99% of the people behind the scenes with the Patriots. And those names, by the way, for the most part, come and go. Who doesn't come and go? Ernie Adams, the fixer, the guy who was involved in Spygate 1, Deflategate, Ernie Adams. He's been there forever. Nobody knows anything about him. Nobody's talking about, we're talking about him on this show, right? We've got insiders on this show. And so we take our coverage to the next level. Not, at least outside of Boston. I'm sure people in Boston talking about Ernie Adams, right? He's still there. But so when you look at the organization, how it's set up, where there are no individuals, it's all focused on Belichick. It's like college. It reminds me of a college coach. And the best example of what I mean is the situation Tom Brady is going through right now. Think of Bill Belichick as like a Nick Saban, right? The players come and go with Alabama. They're interchangeable. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about Alabama, we're talking about when we're talking about the Patriots, we're talking about Belichick. And look at how they're treating Brady. In the past, listen to this. in the past, when Brady may or may not have had a hammer in negotiations with the team, what has he done? We've been told from reporters, all indications are he's taken less. He's been a good team guy when he was at his peak, as a talent. Now, perhaps we know he's not even close to his peak. He's been struggling. But a big reason he's been struggling, in my opinion, he may be hurt. His elbow may be a major issue. That's possible. Guy's getting old. No doubt his performance has gone downhill, and there's indications that age has caught up to him. That said, take a look around the league. Outside of a Lamar Jackson or an Aaron Rodgers or a Russell Wilson or a Pat Mahomes, maybe. Take those guys out. How many quarterbacks out there could do really well at a championship level or playoff level without stars around them? I mean, look at Kirk Cousins' supporting cast. He has a awesome supporting cast in terms of skill position players. Minnesota. Not for long, it appears, with Dalvin Cook, who's been hurt. But, Kirk Cousins is this, suddenly he's this MVP candidate, right? Compare those weapons and the Vikings record to the Patriots' weapons, or there are no weapons, by the way. They don't exist. The Patriots' weapons, and their record. They've got a great record. Minnesota's turned the season around and doing extremely well now. But there's no comparison. Brady, somehow, some way, has willed that team. You might not want to give him credit, but he has. So at the end of the day, knowing that he's clearly given Bill Belichick a break. Think about like Gladiator, when you're in the pit and it's two gladiators and one has the other guy down, his foot's on his throat, and he looks up to the emperor or whatever it is. That was Tom Brady on Bill Belichick for years. He could have taken him out, figuratively, right? In negotiations. What did he do? He let him up. The emperor, whatever, gave one of those. Now Bill's got the roles are reversed. And what's going to happen? Clearly, Belichick is cold-blooded. And so that's how it works. And Brady doesn't matter at the end of the day. He just doesn't. He's an interchangeable part. To Bill Belichick, he is. We'll see what happens in the end, how this all works out. And it may just work out because Brady can't play. We may find that out here in the next few weeks or next season. Bill was right. My whole point is that Bill runs the Patriots. Nothing moves without him knowing about it. You think that somebody in that organization got a press credential with a video camera to shoot the field or the stadium for any reason without him knowing about it, or one of his assistants knowing about it directly? Because the implication is nobody in football knew about it at the Patriots. There's no way. No way. And as the leader of this organization that is a constant offender over and over and over again, and we know the NFL is complicit in directly covering up for them in the most egregious, brazen way, you would think that the media at some point would say something about it, would cover it that way, cover it the way your company hopefully operates. But a lot of companies do. A lot of organizations do. For every reason Belichick, we've been told, is successful, those reasons, that same reason is why he had to know something about this. There's no chance he didn't. Did he know directly what was going to happen with who the videographer was or what their exact plans were? No. I highly doubt it. But to think that he had absolutely nothing to do with it. Please. Right. You can't tell me he's this great coach because he doesn't miss anything in that organization. You know, it's a top-down organization. They're all just focused on winning. It's the culture. Okay. If it's the culture, Bill Belichick, I didn't know anything. That's exactly what he did. I don't know anything. And then we hear from the media tells us this is the worst. And this is when you know the media is rolled over and it is not doing its job. When we hear the media, it's laughable. I'm laughing. Say, the Patriots football operation was livid. What? What's that got to do with anything? In other words, you're in the bag. Why would you say that? In other words, you're saying, I believe Bill. I believe Bill, even though I have no proof, even though I'm not in the building, even though I'm not part of the organization. There's really no way to know unless you're there. And these reporters, as close as they are to the team, they're the first ones who will admit to you they're not there. They're not employed by the organization. So if you're not there, you might want to pump the brakes on saying the Patriots football operations was livid, because you're just telling people that you 1,000% believe and sign off on what Belichick is saying. So at the end of the day, when it comes right down to it, the NFL doesn't have to have integrity. The Patriots don't have to have integrity. They don't have to live up to what they tell you they're doing, to what they tell you the game is based on when you lay that bet down. And mind you, I'm not blaming the Patriots. This really isn't about the Patriots. It's about the league, the NFL, and the media. That's the most important part. The media. That's everything. Jamel Hill was on the show yesterday. We talked about it for a while. And I said to her, I truly believe that the problem that we have, why we don't know how Joe Paterno happens, put it that way, right? Is, and I'm not saying the guys covering Penn State were making a lot of money, but in the media, you've got these intimate relationships in business between the teams and the organizations that are covering those teams. It's a financial arrangement. It's how you make your living on both sides. And because of that, both sides are protecting one another. The problem with that is, of course, you're not plugged into reality when you're reporting on what's going on. And because the media has so much influence today, more so today than it ever has in sports. We talked about it with Mike McCarthy 2 days ago, right? Football now is really important. It's moved to the center of our culture, but we're not getting the straight dope. That's why I'm so focused on what's going on right now with the Patriots. And that's why, you know, this situation with the Jags is really extraordinary, really extraordinary. Coming up, we're going to be talking to the face of the Big Ten Network, guy you know, Dave Refson. If you don't know his name, Dave Refson is the guy. He's the main anchor on Big Ten Network in the aftermath of College Signing Day. And so, as we always do, we're going to bring you a big story that you may have heard about. And some of you out there, I know, are very well versed, like our producer, Cam Smith, very well versed on college football, high school football recruiting, right? But some of you aren't. Like me, I'm not that well versed. I'm not all that excited about it. So what I wanted to do was focus on USC. I also wanted to bring you something that I think you'll find fascinating and enjoy. So out of yesterday, signing day, and understand, yesterday, Cam, I don't know if you concur with this, but yesterday and then the other signing day coming up this year, next year, 2020. Those 2 days, those are the two most important days of the year in college football. Not LSU Alabama game that you watched, not the Santa Clara game last year or the championship game this year. No. The most important days in college football, yesterday and then the other signing day. Those are the most important days. That's the NFL draft of college football, so to speak. That's when rosters are replenished. Or in the case of USC, not replenished. So I want to start off by covering, I think, the big story by far of signing day. And this is a team that we're experts on, we're out front on, which is why we're going to show you this. USC, total disaster, epic, historic catastrophe in attempting to replenish their roster. Think about the NFL draft, right? And what if USC was part of it and they didn't have any draft picks or something, or the small number of draft picks they had sucked? So if you would, Cam Smith, our producer, let's run a piece of tape that I put together on the USC recruiting situation, starting off with the national perspective from friend of the show, Barton Simmons of 24/7, and then Ryan Abraham of USC, who we're indebted to, of USC football. We've got some video of those guys analyzing USC from a national perspective, and then we'll get a micro. It's a short video, but you'll have a good idea of where USC is.
Tennessee on the rise as your biggest winner. As for your biggest loser, who was it?
Let's go to USC. I mean, just go down the rankings. You're going to forget that USC is there because you're going to get down to the MAC and the FCS schools before you find them. I mean, that's what USC is doing right now. They enter the day outside the top 80. They close the day just inside the top 80. They got one commit on the day, Tui Pelotu, who is actually the younger brother of a kid that's already on the roster, Marlon Tui Pelotu, who's a really good player. And Tui Pelotu is a really good player. But for a program of USC's stature, in a time in which they have to be making some moves and doing some good things on the recruiting trail to sort of, I don't know, give some confidence to future recruits, to the current roster, the fan base, it just didn't come today. Only 11 commits so far. They're going to have about 18 or 19 in this class, and they missed on Justin Flo, who was a kid out of their backyard, a five-star inside linebacker, the #1 inside linebacker in the country. It looked like USC would have a chance to finish with them, steal him, but Oregon, who is now the king of the Pac-12, and Mario Cristobal, just too much for USC to handle there, and was able to get Justin Flo up to Eugene for that commitment. So as we look at this, USC, just such a tall task to continue to climb this mountain and get up to a respectable area outside that top 70.
Why? Why is it a tall task? That's the same coach.
Really needs to be a top 5 team, but they'll take anything at this point.
It was basically the worst class in USC.
This is Ryan Abraham.
Since 1996.
USCFootball.com.
And I've never seen a class that has been this bad. The worst class was last year, ranked number 20. Now, they got a couple guys in Chris Steele and Brew McCoy afterwards, which have made it a little bit better. Probably would have been top 15. But right now, to be in the high 70s and dead last in the Pac-12, we've never seen anything like this before. So I know the numbers are small, but this is just the worst class that we've ever seen. And that's basically going to be the 5 and 7 class. And to miss out, it could have saved some things. Would you get a guy like Justin Flo, the top linebacker, the top player in California?
And that's Justin Flo video of him right there. That's Justin Flo, California. That's who they missed out on.
He ends up going to Oregon. So it's not a banner day as far as USC recruiting goes. We've just never seen anything like this before. If you look at the top 25 players in California, according to the 247 Sports,
check out the Matt Leinart tweet from yesterday.
Signed or committed out of state right now. There's only one
That's
player in the top 25
recruiting class ranking.
Going to a California school, and that school is Stanford. Every year, USC would average almost a 4-star when you're talking about players that they signed. They don't have a single 24/7 composite 4-star committed right now. I think this is going to be a situation where USC has to circle the wagons and go, you know what, we're going to make changes on the staff. we have a talented roster right now. If you're Clay Helton, we have to make the most of it because
right now they do.
Replenishing of the talent looks like it's hitting a bit of a snag, especially with this recruiting class. I don't think you can do it again. So you got to get out and start winning games and make sure the 2021 class doesn't have the kind of numbers that this one is. You can't be last in the Pac-12 under any circumstances. I mean, that just can't happen, and it did.
10.
So, as for USC, right? Why is all this happening? What the hell's going on? I mean, none of it makes sense. Clay Helton, why is he still there? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense unless you know that USC just inaugurated a new president who they brought in from the University of North Carolina. Normally, that doesn't matter. 99 times out of 100, major private universities aren't on the hook for $1 billion in payouts to victims who have sued the university because of the misconduct of faculty and administrators. That's what's happening at USC. Misconduct of people who worked at USC. Over $1 billion in damages in civil lawsuits over the last 10 years. Ongoing. That doesn't even account for the college admission scandal, of which USC literally is in the middle of it. Started it. You could argue started it or was the majority of it. Donna Heinel, of all the people besides Rick Singer, a woman named Donna Heinel, who was hired by Pat Hayden, who was athletic director of USC at the time, was the mastermind of the majority of the offenses cited in the DOJ indictments. And some of those investments, some of those instances of illegal activity, of which we've got celebrities now going to prison, federal prison over already, and we're going to have more. Some of those illegal activities involved the USC football team under the current coach, Clay Helton. Unnamed people in those indictments so far. But this all stemmed from Donna Heinel, who was an assistant athletic director in the USC athletic department, directly reporting to Pat Hayden. And I've been told by sources at USC within the football program and outside the football program that nothing happened in terms of getting players for the team until that player went through Donna Heinel academically, eligibility wise. And she was the person taking the money from the celebrities to get their kids in under the false pretense, making up these phony biographies of their kids as athletes, some of whom were fake football players. Now, there haven't been any names named yet. And I can tell you for a fact, I've probably reported about this and broke as much news as anybody in the country on my website. It's on my website right now, SportsbyBrooks.com. Just search college admission scandal, SportsbyBrooks.com, and you can read about it. So I've broken a lot of news on this. I know what the DOJ's method has been and the FBI. And I can tell you, a lot of people are being protected. And I'm not so sure it's justified, because I'm not so sure the people who are being protected even know it or have. If you're going to be protected, you better be doing something for the DOJ, right? Department of Justice or any of the feds. You better be giving them information. I'm not so sure that's the case. I think they're just protecting certain people because they're high profile sports celebrities. A name who is involved, I know he's involved, I've reported on it, is Rick Barnes, who's at Tennessee right now. But his criminal offenses, in my opinion, this is my opinion, took place at the University of Texas. But I've documented it on my website. And in my story, an individual was fired from his job because of my story. It's a long, situation that we can get into later. But so the bottom line is USC has all of these problems with the civil lawsuits, $1 billion in payouts. They've got the college admission scandal. There could be other shoes to drop. And you could certainly make the argument that perhaps Clay Helton is still there because he knows too much at this instant. What if he were to get fired and then somebody would come to him and want to talk to him about the college admission scandal? The other big factor, the other real shoe to drop to be following, this may or may not happen. I think it probably will. I have to believe it will. How did this college admission scandal break in the first place? It broke because Rick Singer finally got caught. And what did he do? He sang like a bird, and he's continuing to. He's protecting a lot of people. He's protecting a lot of athletes and athletic department administrators to this day. He continues to. I know he is. As an aside, but that's why this case exists, because they caught Rick Singer. He doesn't want to go to prison the rest of his life, so he's going to tell the DOJ whatever he tells them. He's not telling them everything yet. I know that. Now, if Rick Singer is the top person in the food chain, the next person down, and you don't even know this is ridiculous. In the way that the media has covered it, they have not really drilled down on what was the primary feeder into Rick Singer's criminal activity. It was USC. Now, you know about the celebrities, right? But you don't know that this all emanated out of the USC athletic department and Donna Heinel. And so Donna Heinel is facing decades of federal prison time. Decades. All right. And she's really in the same spot as Rick Singer. If she decides to talk, I think that these civil lawsuits, the damage that will be done to USC that has been done, forget about the financial part. USC can cover that. I don't care what anybody says. This talk about the buyout, the $20 million buyout of Helton, that's ridiculous. Right? I'm not even, and for all I know, some of that's insurance as far as SC is concerned in paying out these civil damages. But if Donna Heinel decides to sing, I told you before, and remember where you heard it. But look, it's on paper. You can find it in the indictments. USC football, in order to get those phony USC place kickers and punters, isn't it funny how the media reported that Donna Heinel created these phony profiles with Rick Singer? You know about that, right? With water polo and rowing and crew and swimming and football. Where's the media on that? I'm on it. You can read about it on my site. We're talking about it right now. Clay Helton, still there, right? Wait a minute. And I've talked to sources who've told me that you can bet that they had to deal with Donna Heinel. Nobody got on the team at all without her saying so. So if that's the case, what's going on at USC? How did those kids get on the team, or at least get on the team under the pretense of being a real player? How did that happen? Did some monetary compensation perhaps change hands, like what happened in every other situation in that whole case? Right? Donna Heinel was paid to create fake profiles with Rick Singer, by Rick Singer. So here's how it worked. You had parents, let's say in Orange County, wanted their kids to get into SC. In some cases, and he did this with other schools. He did this with Cal, did this with Texas, but Rick Singer and Donna Heinel, in the case of USC, would create these phony profiles, literally find photos of anonymous place kickers on the internet, and then put the head, of the son of the client of Rick Singer, who's trying to get Rick Singer to get their kid into USC, into those photos, right? And then Donna Heinel takes that, and she's able to get those students into USC under that pretense. And I know that the USC football team knew about it. So if that's the case, what's going on? Why would they do that? Why? Could be a quid pro quo in some other way. Very easily. Maybe Donna Heinel's looking the other way on kids that are horrible students. Whatever. But something's going on. And while I doubt that's a factor, I'm just giving you a heads up that those civil suits could pale in comparison to the damage that could be done to SC when it comes to integrity, credibility, esteem. Because SC right now, knowing people as I know a lot of people here, I know a lot of parents trying to get their kids into USC. It's extremely difficult. It's almost impossible, believe it or not. It's a private school. Do whatever they want, right? So that's the backdrop of the situation. And the reason I went into that was you've got a new president who was brought in to clean up that mess. That's why she's here. And it's critical to have that explained to you. It's something you know about, the college admissions scandal. You don't know about the civil lawsuits, probably, unless you're an LA person, SC person, right? But you've heard of the college admissions scandal. That's a big part of this. She's been brought in as the former esteemed president of the University of North Carolina, Carol Folt is her name, to come in, fire a bunch of people, replace a bunch of people, change the culture, right? That's her job. That's what she's supposed to be doing. The culture that created all of this mess, right, is front and center in the Board of Trustees. USC, up until the last 3 months, in the history of the school, had the most ridiculous setup in the history of boards of trustees at major universities. They had like 200 people on the board, right? In name only. But that was done if you gave enough money. Jeannie Buss was on the Board of Trustees of USC. I could tick off a lot of celebrities. They were on the Board of Trustees. They never went to a meeting. They never made a decision. They never voted on anything. It was a ceremonial post. I've never heard of a school doing that. I've covered a lot of them. I can tell you Ohio State doesn't do it. Georgia doesn't do it. The schools that I've covered really closely, SC does it. Carol Folt, one of the first things she did when she was inaugurated as president was change the rules, institute term limits, age limits, attendance requirements, right, of the board. She did all of that. And nothing could strike at the heart of what created the corruption at USC than doing that. And what has enabled the football team and the problems in the athletic department that created Donna Heinel. Part of the reason the Donna Heinel stuff was created with the college admissions scandal was you had no oversight of the athletic department by adults. It was done by big donors who spent a lot of money to get on the board and then just decided to hire their buddies, Lynn Swann. And then Lynn Swann ends up negotiating a $20 million buyout for Clay Helton. That's what happened. So Carol Folt just hired Mike Bone from the University of Cincinnati, but he was the AD at Colorado, right? He is a legitimate athletic director from the industry. This is the first time USC has ever had that, ever. So now that you know all that, now that you know all of that, think about the situation in recruiting right now, which is really weird because why would USC put up with that? Why would they put up with Clay Helton? The fact that they're in this spot, I just want to point out one thing, by the way. Well, Clay Helton's job's been up in the air and you never know what's going to, no. The class they have right now, there's no excuse. I mean, this is, as you just heard, Ryan, he's been covering it since 96. I mean, that's when online recruiting started. When did that start? You're talking about 25 years? This is the worst class in history. There's no way that should happen. It's on Clay Helton, period. If you ever had any question about whether or not he should be coaching the team, now you know he shouldn't. That confirms it. right? Why does he have a job? He has a job because of Carol Folt, period. I just laid it out for you. That's why. That's why he has a job. She came in, and a new sheriff's in town, and USC is undergoing an existential crisis that no one is acknowledging in the media or in public. They are. And I'm not saying it's imminent, but the lawsuits, the payouts, and now the college admission scandal required SC to bring somebody in like her if they want to stick around and be a major university going forward. That's how bad it is there. And so she told the board of trustees, she told Rick Caruso and Wayne Hughes, who she kicked off the board, who are the two biggest donors at USC and hired the football coach and the athletic director. She told them, you listen to me. And then she changed the rules of the board, their organization, kicking Wayne Hughes off the board with an age limit. Right. That's power. She's in charge. She's deciding. And she's decided that the future of USC and the reputation of USC, right, is more important than this one situation that's going on right now in this window of time. So that's why Clay Helton is still coach, because you've got a new sheriff who is actually empowered for now. She just came in and she just walked into a burning building, and the people who have created the burning building are asking her, please help us, save us from ourselves. You can imagine the conversation that went on when Carol was first hired at SC by the trustees. That's, I'm sure, part of what they said. Please help us, save us from ourselves. We've got us in this mess. We've gotten us into this mess. Help us. Of course, now that she's doling out the prescription to solve it, I don't know if they're enjoying that process, that painful process. So SC has to come into the real world, right? Like every other school in how it's managed. So now you know the situation. I also want to inform you of what is the best story of yesterday in college football recruiting by far. USC is obviously a dark one, but a light one is, I want to show you this video of, and this is the talk of the recruiting world, but this is just a portion of what they put out. Baylor, right? Baylor University, Matt Rule. We've talked about him. Turn the program around. So when they sign players yesterday, they put videos out, including of Matt Rule, the coach, videos in which the players and the coach were portrayed as puppets during this signing day process. So we've got a little video for you as examples. So this is the Matt Rule one.
Today is a great day as it's signing day.
This is real.
I'm so proud of all of our signees and excited to see the future of Baylor football. I'd like to thank our players. I'd like to thank our coaches' families, and everyone that has helped us along the way in this recruiting process. I'd like to thank all of the young men who have decided to attend Baylor University, their high school coaches.
This is real.
Their families for their faith and confidence in our ability to develop them in every aspect of their life. With all that being said, it's been a long recruiting journey, but we're not done yet. What's next? Sick 'em.
Okay, so that's how I started off their timeline yesterday on Twitter.
His announcement just a minute away on where he's going to go and attend college.
This is a player who signed with Baylor.
Where are you going to be attending college next year?
First and foremost, I would like to give thanks and honor to my Lord and Savior.
They set this up in advance with the players.
Coach W.T. Johnson and Coach Drew Johnston for pushing me to become the young man and player I am today. I can't forget my man, Coach
I think David
Jeff
Lloyd
Sparks,
knows he's on this video.
and lovely Miss McMahon and my family for being there for me. With that being said,
he's got the earrings.
I will be continuing my football and academic career at Baylor University.
High production value on that. Here's another one.
All the hard work, all the sacrifice.
They did this for all the players.
Today is the day it all pays off. This moment is for everyone, all my coaches, family, and teammates. But I didn't get here alone. Mama, Thanks for being my #1 fan. To my coaches and teammates, you always push me to become better, and I am forever thankful for that. From the 903.
Can we work on the
254,
puppet, you know, with the speech?
With my next
syncing
chapter,
that up a little
I'm
bit.
going to be a Baylor Bear.
I had a dream of this day since I was a
But
kid.
as you can see,
Taking a lot of
they have
hard work and
modeled the
sacrifice.
puppets
My family,
after the
coaches,
player.
and
Well,
teammates
actually, you
have been
can't
there
see
every
because they
step of
cut
the
out
way.
the parts
After
with the
talking
actual
with my
players to
family
make
and
it
friends,
shorter.
I've made my decision.
But
I'm
these
gonna be a
puppets
Baylor Bear. Sick 'em.
look like they're supposed to look like the players. Something tells me they don't really look like the players, but
first and foremost, I want to
so these are all different.
throughout this whole journey.
And so when a player would announce yesterday he was going to Baylor, the Baylor timeline would put this video up. I mean,
every rep, every weight, every day and night.
This is the end.
This day and this moment would seem crazy to most people, but it isn't crazy to me. This is what I've worked for.
He's working out. He's got
my
the glasses
coaching staff
on.
and my awesome teammates back at
Oh
Sexy
my
High School.
God.
Thank you for always being there for me. This is the moment we have worked for. I'm going to be a Baylor Bear. Sick 'em.
Wow. Wow. That's a keeper. That goes into the vault. Matt Rule. I'll say this. No matter what happens to Matt Rule, the head coach at Baylor, who's turned that program around and, of course, is right now rumored for multiple NFL head coaching jobs. Matt Lombardo covers the Giants for NJ.com, talked about him for the Giants and the Jets. Bedard talked about him. A lot of people. John McClain of the Houston Chronicle, who's been with us a couple of days ago. Clarence Hill Jr. of the Fort Worth Star Telegram. Matt Rule's name is on the tip of every reporter's tongue, right? I will always remember Matt Rule in the future from yesterday. And you say to yourself, when I first saw it, my first reaction was, and I saw a lot of memes on this. Okay. Bad idea department. Who came up with that? Right. But when I thought about it, it was a brilliant idea. It is a brilliant idea, regardless of what we think. What my response is, this 52-year-old guy sitting in LA, whatever, completely divorced and detached from that situation that he's in and with the players and their recruiting and the program. He's got a pretty good track record so far, too. But think about it. If you do pre-production with the players, first of all, even though the videos kind of sucked, can we get the voices and the puppets synced? Was that too much to ask? We got to be detail-oriented here at this Baylor program, but which they're not. But can you imagine, though, what it must have been like for the players to do that? And then once you make that commitment for the pre-production, you're that much less likely maybe to flip on signing day because we've got this puppet show and it features you and the puppet looks like you. That's a pretty damn good idea. Amazing. And I'll guarantee you that was part of the thought process in doing the puppet videos by Matt Rule and Baylor. So we're going to continue our conversation on college football. We're going to move over to the Big Ten, college football at large, college football history, and talk to Dave Revson, the face of the Big Ten Network, former ESPNer, former great ESPN radio host, I might add. Big fan. Dave, thanks so much, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Brooks. You'd think they could get a better looking face, but this is the best they can do.
So, all right, give me the quick overview. How'd the Big Ten do yesterday?
In recruiting, I think reasonably well. Now, I'm not a big recruit, Nick. I do not.
Nor am I. That's why I'm asking you.
Right. I don't host our recruiting show. I begged off of it about 2 years in because I'm truthfully, my whole thing is we get the luxury, myself and Howard Griffith and Jerry DiNardo, of going on our preseason tour every year. We get on a bus and we spend about 18 days going throughout the Big Ten and watching guys practice. And I guess I just feel like I get a much better sense for the outstanding freshmen, the top freshmen, when we're there in the preseason. And so I kind of check off the list here. So you need to watch and kind of do it that way. It seems like the Big Ten did really well. Ohio State, really cleaned up. I mean, 10 of the top 100 players in the country is pretty remarkable. And I think recruiting is has become kind of the rich getting richer, and you see all the 5 stars essentially go into 6 or 7 programs, and one of them is, of course, Ohio State. So it seems like they did well. It looks like Maryland had a really good class, which frankly they needed. I think Michael Axley needed a lot of help after this year, so that's encouraging. But it feels like it was kind of the usual suspects in the Big Ten, Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State, and then a few others who kind of rose up and had better than expected classes. But I think the really cool thing about the Big Ten, and again, why I reserve judgment a little bit, is this league has some incredible developmental programs. Wisconsin's never at the very top of the recruiting rankings, and yet look at how good they are year in and year out. I realize Michigan State's fallen off a little bit these last couple of years, but you could make the same argument for them for a long time. You could make that argument about Iowa, about Northwestern, about a lot of these programs that don't necessarily recruit at the very top of the rankings, but end up competing really well in our league and on a national scale. And so I think that's part of why, I don't want to say I'm disenchanted with it, but I just reserve judgment on recruiting until I see guys on the field.
Totally with you. I think one of the most, and this was a big talking point with Ohio State, Michigan this year. Well, look at all the 5 stars at Ohio State. Well, look at all the 5 stars at Washington State. Look at all the 5 stars when Bill Snyder was at Kansas State. Now those guys, they shouldn't be outliers. There should be more, I think, coaches focused on developing players, whereas it really has become a recruiting arms race when Dabo Sweeney has a miniature golf course, and Matt Rule's doing puppet shows with the players yesterday. So I guess part of it's fun, but that's really what it's seemingly turned into. And speaking of Jim Harbaugh in Michigan, I'm not so sure that Harbaugh has given Mark D'Antonio cover this year, but Michigan State laid an egg. He's got this retirement thing coming up, or this renewal payment for Michigan State coming. I haven't heard a lot of talk about Michigan State and his future. Can you give us a little insight into that situation?
I think it's a tricky one. Now, he did come out and say probably about maybe 2 weeks ago, I think right before their last game, it was 3 weeks ago now, saying he fully expected to be back next year. There is, as you said, there's this bonus that is hanging out there for Mark. My sense is that if Michigan State didn't want him back, Brooks, that's the kind of thing where you can say, hey, let's negotiate something here.
Right.
Because you don't want to, Mark D'Antonio has been incredible for Michigan State, and you certainly don't want him in a situation where he feels compelled to come back because that money's looming out there, or they feel, that's not the right situation for us. And so we're not going to allow you to leave on your own terms. I think either way, that's not what you want. You would want a consensus. I guess I know Mark well enough to think he wouldn't be back if he wasn't devoted to getting it back to where he believes it can be. And so my thought is that he probably will come back. I guess I'd be surprised if he didn't. They did not have a good recruiting class, though, and I think it's hard. It's difficult with those rumors flying out there, because while you might be able to say to a young guy, yeah, I'm going to be back, I'm going to be your coach next year, I'm going to be your coach in 2 years, I don't know whether you can say I'm going to be your coach for 5 years. And I think that in this day and age, now, of course, look, there's the transfer portal, and guys say, well, I might not be your player in 4 or 5 years, too. Right. So there's 2 sides to that coin. Yeah. But I do think that for years, Mark D'Antonio has preached stability, not just with himself, but also with his staff. I mean, one of the most, you have very little change on that staff. You had Pat Narduzzi go and get the head coaching job at Pitt. He's had a couple of guys in various points along the way leave for head coaching jobs, but essentially everyone else has stayed. And his loyalty has been something that's been quite admirable, but frankly may have cost them a little bit here in the last couple of years as their offense has failed to progress. So all of those things he's been able to preach, I'm not sure that he can right now, and I think that's the challenge. It's something they're going to need to figure out. They're going to need to come up with some sort of a narrative here, because the recruiting class was clearly subpar.
I think one of the reasons that makes Twitter so valuable is, even though I recognize Mark D'Antonio has been around a long time, I worked in Columbus for 6 years and covered, he was there then. But I remember going on Twitter after one of Michigan's many ugly losses this year and just thinking to myself, how bad does that offense have to be? How inconsistent does this team over the years, just recently, have to be? How many things off the field have to happen for Michigan State to think about moving on? And so I kind of expressed that. And what was really interesting was I got major pushback from Michigan State fans. And I think that really speaks to this conversation, that he still has that goodwill capital, apparently, the CFP appearance. I don't know what it is, but that's my sense. Now, another guy who has some goodwill capital, but he has to have you scratching your head now, is Pat Fitzgerald, because Northwestern was horrific. That's an overused word, but watching that team closely a couple of different times this season, basic execution at times. I mean, what's your read on Northwestern, where that program, and not that Pat's going to lose he's not going to lose his job. He's not in trouble. He's been great for Northwestern, but what's going on with that program?
Well, I think there's a lot of similarities between D'Antonio and Fitzgerald. They both have incredible loyalty, and they have a lot of goodwill built up at each one of their places. And people have institutional memory, and certainly Northwestern history is far worse than Michigan State. But people remember 25 years ago how bad it was before Gary Barnett. And of course, Gary Barnett kind of gave birth to Pat Fitzgerald as a Northwestern entity, because he was the cornerstone of his greatest teams. And so I think there's just kind of a feeling of, Pat Fitzgerald is a great face of that university. They had won 36 games in the previous 4 years before this year, which is remarkable. I mean, that's just stunning. They would go decades without winning 36 games. I mean, literally, that's not an exaggeration. And so the offense was broken, and the defense was still pretty good, and the defense kept them in games, but they were just horrible offensively. They had the Clemson 5-star transfer, Hunter Johnson, who all kinds of personal problems. His mom was diagnosed with cancer, and his head just wasn't in it. He had leaned on the same offensive coordinator Fitz had for years. He finally said enough is enough and got rid of him at the end of this year and made what looks like a really good hire in Mike Bajakian from Boston College. So I think the foundation there is great. Their facility is mind-boggling. I mean, what they've done, it's incredible to see the changes that school's made. I call play-by-play on their basketball game last night, and I went and saw their new basketball practice facility, and it's incredible. Yeah. And then you call the game from their new basketball arena, which is amazing. So all the things that they needed to do for years that they didn't do to support their coaches, they have done. And so I feel like from Northwestern's point of view, I think this is more of a blip. There's certainly no uncertainty about Pat Fitzgerald's future. It looks like he had a pretty good class yesterday. They got a couple kids with, a ton of high major offers. So my sense is that he just needed to retool the offense, and it looks like he's headed in the direction to do that.
Visiting with Dave Revson, Big Ten Network. One guy we've talked about a lot on this show, and some of my sources out here in L.A. told me was the one guy that SC, Carol Folt, the new president, did look closely at. And one of the reasons is SC has been pondering an African-American head coach because they haven't had one before. And James Franklin, that was part of it. That's not the majority of the reason, but that was one factor. And so in looking at James Franklin, talking to some people out in that region, there's some indication that with the improvement of the facilities and the salaries of the assistant coaches and the fact that he's from that area, that this could actually be a destination job, Penn State, for James Franklin. Where do you weigh in on that?
I think it could be. It's a really hard job in some ways, Brooks, just because of the expectations. I think it's similar to Michigan, that there is a little bit of a wrong place at the wrong time right now, just because of the way that Ohio State has it rolling. I mean, it's just a machine. Right. And so as good as Penn State has been, and they have been really, really good, you're still, other than, the 1 year they did have a Rose Bowl year under James and won the Big Ten, but haven't made the playoff yet. And Penn State sees themselves in that way. And I think they can be that program. But the challenge is, can you be that program when you have another program in your league and in your division that's in your way? And so that is the push and pull. But yeah, James Franklin's a Pennsylvania guy. He loves Penn State. He has recruited very well. And you can see the fruits of that again, kind of not just the recruiting rankings, but watching the way they execute on the field. He's got some really good players, particularly on that defense. So yeah, my sense is, he just signed a new contract extension. I would guess that the rumors and the whispers that you were hearing from USC probably had something to do with that. Yep. But I think the AD, Sandy Barber, understands what a great coach James Franklin is. He's a really good representative of the university. And I think they believe they have the right guy. It's pretty clear from the fact they gave him the extension that they did. And I do too. So I would be surprised were he to leave, but I also acknowledge that's a tough job. Michigan's a tough job. Michigan State's a tough job just because of the way Ohio State has it going.
Unbelievable job at Minnesota by PJ Fleck. I was one of the guys who was burying PJ Fleck, who was eulogizing PJ Fleck as this over-the-top guy, big talker. We've seen him many times. Nothing's going to happen. What the hell happened at Minnesota? And is that possibly, I mean, as a football historian, nobody probably knows better the great seeming tradition of Minnesota early on in college football history. I wish we had 2 hours to talk college football history. We'll get to it here in 1 second. But what's going on at Minnesota, and is he going to stick around?
Well, I mean, he did sign an extension also. I haven't seen all the terms of it. You know, some of these, the issue is the buyout, of course, and what terms that's on. He certainly had a lot of leverage. So if the buyout is smaller, then there's the opportunity to move on. I believe that he's going to stay. As to what happened, he's a really good football coach. I think that's the part of it that people almost don't give him credit for.
Yeah.
Because there is all this stuff you're talking about. There is kind of the salesmanship and the slogans and all of that.
Well, he shaved his head, and that's a different look. But he was a great coach at a lower level. I think that's a really key point that people don't bring up. His resume is legit as a head coach at a very young age. Yeah.
Yeah, and he took Western Michigan to the Cotton Bowl.
Yes.
He took over a winless program and took them to the Cotton Bowl. I mean, that's exceptional. And he's done a really nice job with Minnesota. He found a very good quarterback in Tanner Morgan who runs that RPO scheme to perfection. He found 3 really talented wide receivers. They have NFL wide receivers there. And so that offense functions really well. They've gotten good enough on defense. He made a bold move in the middle of last season, the 2018 season, and got rid of his defensive coordinator, and they saw instantaneous results. They promoted Joe Rossi, who had been at Rutgers in our league prior to that, and Joe's done an incredible job. And that defense got better. I mean, literally overnight, like week to week, it got better, and now it's one of the better defenses in the league. So, yeah, he's a really good coach, and sometimes I feel like all that other stuff overshadows how good he is because people look at that. They say, well, this guy must be hiding something. Or there must be style over substance here. There is both style and substance. And I think that's what separates PJ Fleck. So, yeah, he's really good. Will he be there long term? I mean, again, I take people at face value. I believe it when you sign a contract and you say, this is where I want to be. I think it's overly cynical not to believe someone. I think the difference between Minnesota and Penn State or Michigan State is Minnesota's in the West. The West is eminently winnable. I mean, we've seen Iowa win it. We've seen Northwestern win it. We've seen Wisconsin win it. We saw Minnesota come within a game of winning it. So I think you look at the West, if you're a coach, and you say, you know what? I can get to Indy 2 out of 4 years. I can play for the title. And then we're 1 win away from being in the playoff. So to me, it's a little bit different animal than it is to take over a program that maybe hasn't had recent success in the East and say we can get this thing going.
And there's a certain prioritization going on at the U, I think, with the stadium. It's not Jerry World, but at least they're prioritizing it now. Now it's not an afterthought anymore. And the other thing is you play out in your mind, okay, what job would he take? What job could potentially be open where he could be in line for that? So who knows? But it does look like right now there's a decent chance he could end up sticking around. And, it's funny we started off with recruiting because the conversation about schools like, Northwestern, the season before, you have Minnesota sitting there, and Minnesota more and more looked more and more legit as we went along. And we brought up Mike Leach and what he's done. And I think the playoff structure really skews towards recruiting and the arms race and having 3 deep and gray shirting. And it skews away from the coaching savants that are out there who can make, or talent evaluators, developers. And it really, really hurts, I think, the overall interest of college football. And I know you guys, of course, you've got Barry Alvarez there. You got Jim Delaney there. What do you think is going to happen with the college football playoff? Because I'm hearing some people are telling me, national guys on this show, oh, it's imminent. we're going to have this college football playoff. We're going to have 8 teams. What's your thought on it? And how is the Big Ten, you think, playing into that?
I have vacillated on this. I still think that the fact that we continue to struggle to get the Pac-12 into this playoff is a really bad thing. And I think for there to be the kind of interest in college football nationally that there is in the NFL, you need to have all corners of the country feel included in it. And you have this huge swath of the nation which is having trouble getting into this thing. And so I think that's a problem. And so is the solution to that to go to 6 or 8 teams to guarantee all the Power 5 a berth and then to take one other team, or to go to 8 and guarantee everyone a berth and then go to 3 other teams? Maybe it is. I mean, to me, there's 2 separate kind of forks to this argument, right? So one would be we're just trying to identify the best team. I don't think there's any doubt that among the 4 teams we have in the college football playoff this year, in that grouping, it lies the best team. I think it's indisputable that one of those 4 is the best. So if your argument is simply that we are trying to identify the best team, I think the 4, more often than not, by an overwhelming margin, will be able to do that for you. If you're saying the college football playoff is to drive interest in the sport, well, then that's an entirely different argument, Brooks. And I feel like we may be leaving out big parts of the country. I thought last year when you had 3 of the 4 teams from the Southeast, I don't think that was good for the sport. So I think you have to kind of weigh that as the powers that be and say, what is our goal with this? And the playoff committee's been fairly adamant that their goal is to identify the 4 best teams. And so I get that those are their kind of marching orders. But I do feel like at a certain point, if we continue to be in this same spot year in and year out, where we do have this being strictly a regional playoff, that is not good.
It's really unbelievable. And I think your book, which I want to talk about, The Opening Kickoff, The Tumultuous Birth of a Football Nation, which is phenomenal. And I've read the Oriard books. I've read the Watterson. I've read, the scholarly stuff. I've read the dissertations for the research I've done. And your book, while, it's great on history, it also is really engaging, next level. I was just thinking to myself, reading your book, Dave, thinking, Jesus, this must have taken a long time to write, because you put so much thought in the day-to-day life. I mean, it really is. How many times have you heard people say, well, football's just the backdrop. It's really about something. Well, your book actually is really as much American history about what it was like to live back during those times in history. Really comes alive with the personalities and the media, and it's an extraordinary story. But what really speaks to me when you look at college football history and how it's expanded is how, if anything, you can make the argument that the NFL is regional. I mean, the NFL is persona non grata in certain parts of the region of the country. It always has been and was for a long time in the South, where college football never really has been, because it was a function so much of the media from the very beginning, the syndicated media, and then it kind of grew out of that. But when you look at that, that's why I think college football, it's absurd to say this, but I do think there's some truth to it. It's a sleeping giant, and it always has been for all these years. And for various reasons, we haven't had a playoff. We haven't had a standardized system, determining the champion. But I was wondering, though, when you wrote this book today, I mean, how has it changed your outlook on college football or Of course, nobody really said college football back then. Football was college football. But how has it affected your perspective today, having written that book?
I think it's affected it quite a bit because, as you know, kind of the controlling thesis of my book, which is called The Opening Kickoff, The Tumultuous Birth of a Football Nation, the controlling thesis is this idea that everything that's happening in college football today had its origins in this period between 1890 and 1915 that I focus on. All of the positive things that happened in college football and all of the negative things that happened in college football. So I see every argument that we're having, every debate that we have,
You have the answer. You've already got the answer.
Yeah, well, I see it in the historical context. So like name, image, and likeness, which has been the huge thing this year. As you know, there's a guy who played at Michigan named Willie Heston, And Willie Heston was eminently marketable, and people saw that in 1905. And you could buy on campus at Michigan Willie Heston cigars, and Willie got a piece of the profits. There was a guy, James Hogan, at Yale.
Yale, right?
Yeah, so at Yale, right? I mean, we're thinking about arguably one of the top 2 or 3 most esteemed academic institutions in the country. I mean, Yale was a football factory when it started up. They were the Alabama or the Ohio State or the Auburn of their day. And at Yale, they had a player named James Hogan. And Hogan had a cigarette deal on campus where he got a portion of the cigarettes that were sold in the local grill that, again, were sold with his name, not a portion of the cigarettes, but a portion of the revenue from the cigarettes that, again, were branded with his name. There was all kinds of booster activity around Hogan. They sent him on a Caribbean vacation at the end of the year to show their appreciation.
1905. This is the Needham stuff, right?
1905. Yes. Yes. So again, like these kind of, well, we're in uncharted territory. We've never seen this before. How are we going to handle these issues? That's kind of the thing that I wanted to hammer home. And I didn't know it, Brooks. I mean, I did not set out to write this book. I set out to write an entirely different book about a player at Wisconsin named Pat O'Day, who had this crazy life, as you know, from the book. And I set out to write his biography. And in exploring his life, I realized there was a bigger story to tell. And I kind of used him as a mechanism to weave him through the story. But that there was a story about academic issues, and there was a story about amateurism, and there was a story about injuries and the crisis in college football, which I know you're studying in 1905 when the game nearly died. Like all of those things that are going on today that we believe are unique to this day and age are in fact things that have their antecedents in the very beginnings of the game.
It's a little bit like overall American history. By the way, I think college football, if you look at the first 50 years of the 20th century, and just as an example, the situation with Willis Ward, right? Those kinds of situations, as you look back on the United States in the first half of the 20th century and you're assessing, okay, what was it really like? More specifically outside the South, because I think there's a misnomer that things were a lot different outside the South. They weren't necessarily a lot different, but it's almost like football in the way that things were handled, because the media it's always been so prevalent. It's almost like a little scorecard of the way things are going in America. Whether you look at the stadium boom that included the South, of course, in the 1920s, and then we hit the Depression, it all stops. But what's really fascinating to me is how this college football thing started in the Northeast, and it's like the Ivies handed it off to the South, the rest of the country too. What's really interesting is when I was at the University of Georgia, I remember seeing at the Butts-Mehre building, hey, we used to play Yale every year. And I'm like, wow, the Bulldogs named after the Bulldog at Yale. Hey, Georgia paid for the Walter Camp statue. University of Georgia did. And all of that connection, all that history. And my sense is that you look at the connection there, right? And there's other of those types of connections. I think if those things were taught in school, not, the minutia necessarily or the smaller things, but the big picture stuff, like the Willis Ward thing. To me, the Willis Ward thing should be in schools, maybe regionally, but some of the really big issues. I mean, when you talk about every single program has those kinds of stories, I think that our society would be a little different today, and it might not be as hyperbolic today if we knew our own recent history. And I think football is a mirror of that.
One of the most gratifying things about this book, Brooks, has been that I have heard from a number of teachers who have emailed me and said, I recommended your book to a 16-year-old boy because I couldn't get him interested in history. They love sports. I wanted him to understand how sports is a mirror of society and how sports fits into society. And all of a sudden, he was really interested in yellow journalism because he understood the role that yellow journalism played in spreading football. Or he became interested in this notion of universities being PR mechanisms, or he became interested in muscular Christianity, which was a big selling point for football, and the role that religion had in spreading football. And so this idea that, well, I'm just a sports fan. I like sports. For a lot of people, they don't understand or don't stop and think about the way that sports fits into the broader context of American society. And these are the things, or world society. And these are the things that have always interested me the most. And so I think the thing that I'm most proud of about this book is that it does show kind of this idea of college football just being in the right place at the right time. And all of these events that really had, in some cases, were tangential to sports or almost had nothing to do with sports. And yet, in combination together, kind of everything came together to create this opportunity for college football to flourish. It was just kind of it. It was like the big bang of college football. All of these disparate events come together, and boom, you have this opportunity for this sport, and you have just the right climate for it to flourish.
I every single day, because I've spent years studying college football at this point, every single day I will fall upon a story and I'm like, oh my God, this happened? This guy ended up here and he did this. I mean, but an example of the story I'm talking about is Jack Trice, because everybody knows Jack Trice. If you're a football fan, oh, Jack Trice Stadium, right? Where have I heard that name? You talk about an epic American story in his own personal life, what he went through, the interaction with Minnesota, Missouri, whatever, after he passed away, all that stuff. But then the process that they went through to get to Jack Trice Stadium, where it was a lengthy process. It didn't happen overnight. They turned it down. They turned it, all that stuff. Man, that's got to be, and it's sports. You know, that's why I think your book really is a revelation, and it doesn't surprise me at all because, I mean, look, there's a lot of great football history books out there, but you really wrote it in an engaging way, and that's why people should get it. The opening kickoff, the tumultuous birth of a football nation. Last thing, how much of a role do you think Teddy Roosevelt actually played in saving football in 05-06?
So I talk a lot about this in my book, and I think that Teddy Roosevelt did he save the game himself? I do not believe that he did. I don't think anyone had the power to save the game. I think what he did was he illuminated to the leaders of the game, and as you know, that was basically Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Penn. He essentially told them, look, this thing is in bad shape, and you need to figure out a way to put your own self-interest aside and help kind of chart a course for the future of the sport. You need to think beyond this year's game, Yale versus Harvard, and you need to understand that there are a lot of forces from the outside that are aligning against this sport, and the sport isn't doing itself any favors. So there was certainly what bothered Teddy Roosevelt, I think, the most was the negative press. That bothered him quite a bit. He was bothered by kind of the underhanded nature of the sport. Teddy Roosevelt believed in fairness. And so this notion that guys were punching one another at the line of scrimmage and stuff like that, that bothered him more than anything, that they were circumventing the rules. He believed in the rules strongly. He was an idealist in that way. And so but Teddy Roosevelt, like the violence of the game didn't really bother Teddy. What bothered, because, you know, he loved, right? This is a guy who created a war. He wanted a war, right? He believed in kind of the virility of man and proving yourself. And there was no, he was a sickly youth, and he kind of molded his body physically. And so Teddy thought that was okay. But what bothered him was if there were people who were circumventing the rules. So it wasn't necessarily that someone dropped dead on the field, although that did trouble him. Right. But what troubled him was were it to happen in an underhanded sort of way. And so he essentially said to them, you need to figure this thing out. And he pushed them on that course to figure out for themselves. But if you look at his correspondences, there was certainly, he worked behind the scenes and he kind of pulled some levers, but he never kind of came out and made a public statement.
Not in public,
but
no. Well, here's my, and just in the last day, this is what I every day it changes, but I really think that when you look early on at Pulitzer and Hearst and how they were kind of turning football into professional wrestling in a sense, and it was all a little bit overblown, cartoonish, By the time we get to 1905, the game has now grown to the extent where you have all these people out in the hinterlands playing it. And that's the vast majority of the injuries and the deaths. And so now, wait a minute. Now all these problems are actually real. You know, they're not the cartoons that were, not that those injuries weren't at sometimes real. So I don't think that guys like Camp actually traveled a lot and moved around, but so many of those injuries were not college football related injuries that I think it was lost upon them. And I think it speaks to what you're talking about. They have to think beyond the Northeast and their world. And so, and that may have been driving Roosevelt in a sense, because now, hey guys, this really is legitimate now. This really is different. I know we've got the numbers of the past of the problems. So, but what's really, really interesting is reading his letters that they just put, I don't know how, if they had them online when you were doing the book on the Library Conference. Was it online, all of his letters back then when you were doing the book?
No. So, well, not that I was aware of. I got there's a published book of his letters.
Right.
So I went through that. It's in a bunch, it was in like 5 or 6 volumes. And then a lot of his correspondence back and forth with Camp, I was able to get out of the Walter Camp archives at Yale, which are amazing. And so between, between newspapers, I was able to find a lot of it. But the actual letters, as far as I knew, were not online. I had to go through kind of hard copies.
So I'm sure people have asked you this. Have you thought of doing more, getting more into this, or maybe taking this onto the screen or some of your book? Because I think it'd be great.
I have thought about doing more. When we started talking about this a few minutes ago, you brought up how long it must have taken. The answer is 4 years.
Yeah, I totally believe it.
And I do have this other job, which tends to be fairly time consuming. And I have a great wife and 3 children. And it was more than I understood, Brooks. I kind of started down this path, kind of idealistically saying, wouldn't it be cool to write a book? And man, I found this cool story and I'd really like to tell it. And in the end, I mean, I am so proud of what it turned out to be, but it was exhausting. And it really, I mean, I do not think, like, by the time I finished it, I don't think I was in a great kind of mental state. Right. So the thought of doing another one in the immediate term, I think is a little daunting. I will say, I think I learned a lot. I mean, I could have streamlined it markedly. And I think I could have done it much more expeditiously had I understood what I was doing. I've never done it before, right? So I mean, think about things that are massive that you do for the first time, and then how you can make yourself more efficient. I think I could do it more efficiently now, but it's still a little daunting. I am fascinated by it. I read a ton about it. I've kind of thought in my mind about what the next story is, and I have that in the deep recesses, and I've written down some thoughts, but I just don't see it in the immediate term. I just feel like there's so many other things pulling me in other directions.
What really grabbed me was, from the very beginning of the book, you literally follow the lives of how these people, the mundanities of their, kind of almost like a reality show. And to me, when you're talking about the length of the book, that probably added 30-40% onto the book. This is my opinion. The amount of thought you put into that, transporting people, because it's not passive history what you're doing. It's very active history. You're transporting people into, if I was sitting there and turned to my right, what would I see? That's what you did. That's why I love it so much, because as historically legit as it is, and I've read those other books, the scholarly books and whatnot, to me, if ever there was a book that could go on to a TV screen or go on to one of the streaming services, it would be that in whatever forms. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks. Yeah. And that is the part that was time consuming, right?
Awesome. But it's awesome, dude.
Yeah. I mean, a bar in New York, the Hoffman House Hotel, and I spent a long period of time. Was it a week? I don't know. I mean, looking at old magazine articles about the Hoffman House, seeing pictures about it, reading the story of the guy who was the bookie who I start the book with. Like that does take time. It takes time to reconstruct what Camp Randall looked like in Madison, Wisconsin. It takes time to understand what Madison looked like, or what the stadium at Northwestern where Pat O'Day kicked his 62-yard field goal looked like. And that's the kind of history I enjoy, Brooks. Like, I want to put people in that moment and let them envision, well, what was this? but it does take a lot of time.
Yeah, the best compliment I can give you is I don't know if you read the Power Broker or the LBJ books, but Robert Caro of the Power.
Yeah,
right. That's what it reminds me of. If people are wondering what is he talking about, that's what I'm talking about. Unbelievable. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time. Hopefully we do this again, and I really, really appreciate it. And good luck with what you're up to, man. Stay in touch.
All right. Same to you. This was great. Thank you so much for having me on, and really a pleasure.
Right.
Happy holidays.
That's Dave Revson of the Big Ten Network. And of course, the book is Opening Kickoff, The Tumultuous Birth of a Football Nation. I just said that. I lost my page, and I said that from Hearts. Let's see if I got it right. Let me see if I got that right. Hold on. Yeah, so if you read Robert Caro's books, that's all I have to say. I can't give somebody a bigger recommendation. It's called, I got it right. The Opening Kickoff, the Opening Kickoff, The Tumultuous Birth of a Football Nation, New York Times, Boston Globe, bestseller. And so what he does is he's got legit history, because I've read the scholarly books and all that stuff. He's got all that, but he also, it's like what it was like when you were walking down the freaking street in New York City on your way to the game, and you ducked into this bar and you sat down, and what did you order? And what were they wearing? Not so much in that way, but just it's like a novel. This person, is doing this. And so he took the football history part of it, which is hard enough, right? And then he added in the day-to-day life part of it. And man, when I tell you, that's the kind of thing you're only going to get. It's a little bit of Gore Vidal, and Gore Vidal stuff's based on real stuff for the most part. A little bit of that to it in a way. So when I wasn't planning on, I got his book because his book is a representative of the history that's well respected and cited. His book in scholarly circles, as it should be. But I didn't get his book thinking, wow, it's going to be so much better. I can't wait. So I read like the first few pages. I'm like, wow, this is different. This is cool. I'm learning, stuff about what it was like to live in these places, personalities and things like that. And man, I take it from somebody who knows. If you only knew how hard it is to try to glean details of what it was like to live back then and what those people dealt with and all of those things. So many things are unreported and unspoken. And that's why I told him every single day that I'm looking at this situation with Teddy Roosevelt saving football. Did he really save football? Did this really happen? The one thing that I always bring up on this show is the media, because I'm telling you, just in the context of football, things that we understand to be true could not be more false, could not be more incorrect. Big picture stuff in the history of football, because I've gone in and looked at the primary documents and things of that nature. Things are completely misportrayed. Just one example, the 1869 game, 150 years of football. Yeah, that was not football. They played soccer. They didn't touch the ball with their hands in that game. The ball was round. It was a soccer ball, and they played soccer in 1869. If you do a little bit of research, you'll find that out. That's fine. I don't really care about it, or I'd make a big stink out of it, but that's what happened. But that is the landmark first game of all time. So I could go on and on about it. What is really interesting, though, is how this guy, Teddy Roosevelt, really comes to life. Now I know a little bit more about him and what kind of person he was. And I'm sitting there going through his letters the last couple of days. He's writing, he'll write a letter to like the Emperor of Japan, because he was arbitrating a dispute between the Russians and the Japanese to the point where they came, I think, to his home, to his estate in New York. And he worked out a peace agreement between Russia and Japan coming out of the war that they had just had. So he was like this world figure who won a Nobel Prize, and he's sending these letters to these guys, the Tsar, whoever it is. And then the next letter is to the referee at the Harvard-Yale game, how pissed he is about a play on a punt, about a call he made. I'm not kidding you. And saying, hey, can you come down to the White House and talk about it? Yeah. Eddie, I mean, understand, he was a Harvard guy. Yeah, the first conventional game of American football, Cam Smith, our producer, points out, 1875, Tufts and Harvard. You could also make the argument it was McGill against Harvard, and McGill, of course, up in Montreal came down, and they introduced not something that we didn't already know about, rugby. They brought that mentality with them, but the mentality of picking up the damn ball and running it as opposed to soccer, kicking it around. And that's what they did in 1869. It wouldn't be until McGill played a major role in creating that, okay, let's just pick up the ball, but it's not really rugby, you know? I think the best justification for talking about what I'm talking about right now, legitimacy of it is, why do we call what we have football? I've already explained it on this show. I'm not going to do it right now. Maybe later. Why do we call the NFL? Why do we call that football? Go ahead. Give me the story. There is no story. Good luck. To me, that's the beginning point, right? And when you look at the United States and how different the United States is, when you're trying to quantify that, right? How sovereign we are, how we look at ourselves. And there's a certain, to other people outside the United States, is there a perspective where we're arrogant and we ignore everyone else? How much do we depend on the rest of the world? Think about the principle of us having the audacity to have this game being called the same name you call your game. We're making this huge deal out of this gladiatorial combat game. We're calling it football, even though they barely kick in the game. Everybody else calls soccer football outside our borders. If you're living in Brazil or wherever, you're looking at that, you're frank. What's that all about? Why do the Americans call that football? Right? We don't call it American football. No. Don't call it American football. It's football. To me, that's a little microcosm of the personality that is the United States compared to the rest of the world. We like to think that we're not dependent on everybody else. The other thing think about this, the Super Bowl. We've all had that ingrained in our minds. The most watched event in the history of humankind, Western civilization. Except it isn't, and it's not even close. The World Cup is exponentially bigger when it comes to television audience. But if you went around if you went down to the Universal City Walk right now and did the jaywalking with Jay Leno and asked people, is the Super Bowl got the biggest audience in the world every year? Yeah, of course it does. No, it's not even close, you know? So it's analogous to how we think of ourselves, how other people perceive us, just in the name of the game. And nobody can tell you why it's called football in the United States. Nobody anywhere. I can. I'm one of the very few. That's why I'm doing this. So thanks so much to Dave Revson. That was great. Big Ten Network. I was a kid in a candy store talking about what's going on over at Michigan State. I love that stuff. D'Antonio, what's happening with him. And tomorrow we're going to have Kurt Menefee of Fox NFL Sunday. Other guests, I know, coming up tomorrow. And we'll be around next week as well. We'll have the schedule for you here shortly. But for our producer, Cam Smith, from Los Angeles, we do this every weekday, noon Eastern time. This is Brooks Melchior saying so long. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.